Let me please turn it over to your host for today, Adam Hutchinson, to introduce our speaker. Adam, when you're ready.
Hello, well, great to be here with everyone. Thank you for spending your lunch hour with us. I have the honor to introduce you to Don Cameron, who is a graduate of Cal State Fresno with a degree in biology. And since 1987, he's been the vice president of Terranova Farms, located 25 miles southwest of Fresno, and it covers 7,500 acres, quite a bit of area. And Don also served as president of the California State Board of Food and Ag. And finally, before I get to the presentation, he was awarded the 2017 Governor's Environmental Leadership Award for the work that he's done at Terranova Farm that he's going to talk about today. And before the presentation, we were chatting about, when did you get started doing this work, flooding your farms and fields? And he actually started doing this back in the 1980s, a long time ago. Saw groundwater levels declining and said, hey, we need to capture this stormwater and get it on the ground and help out the aquifer, and found out it wasn't harming a crop. So a true trailblazer, innovator. So really excited to hear about what he's done in the past, and also this past year, as you know, is a very wet year. So a lot of lessons learned in terms of what he encountered this particular year that will hopefully inform how we can do even better in the future. And he's also going to include his collaborators, Scott Bradford and Helen Dalkey. So they're going to also chat about some of the more scientific elements of the work that Don is involved with. So Don, I'm excited to hear what you have to share with us today.
Give me a second. There we go. Well, Adam, thank you. Appreciate the introduction. And Megan, good to see you. And welcome to LunchMAR. This is a pretty unique event that I feel really privileged to be a part of. We'll get into this. Just really wanted to start with some of the background of where we really got started with our project. We actually had a conservation innovation grant in 2010 where I worked with Phil Bashan, and lo and behold, in 2011 we were set up for floodwater, and it showed up. We were able to do a lot of testing, infiltration rates, salt movement, nitrate movement within the 2011 water year. But really what kicked us off was a grant that was submitted through Kings River Conservation District with Dave Merritt. And it was a floodwater corridor grant. We were awarded the grant. It was a $5 million DWR grant with a $2 million match. And it was based on floodwater prevention, preventing flooding downstream from our area. We're on the Kings River. The water goes into the Mendota Pool, joins with the San Joaquin River, and progresses to the north. But, you know, in flood years, you see the towns of Mendota, Firebaugh, Tranquility have that really a lot of risk of flooding, and then further upstream, or actually downstream from that region, there's always a problem. And so our project was about taking floodwater off during flood flows and bringing it on ground and doing groundwater recharge with it. The project is essentially 5 miles of 400 to 500 CFS canal. Was completed in the fall of 2020 with a final cost of around $13 million, a little over budget. So, you know, we look at both sides of this. We look at the floodwater protection side, which is the primary reason for our project, but also the groundwater recharge component. We had seen water levels fall in our wells at the rate of about 1.5 feet per year. And what that means is that it takes more power to pump water. Your your water continues to fall, and at some point, you're going to essentially run out of water. We have a cone of depression. Our farm is essentially where that red mark is. And like I say, we've known for quite some time that we needed to correct the problem if we wanted to continue to farm. In 2014, Sustainable Groundwater Management was signed, and all of a sudden our project became much more relevant to not only ourselves, but to our neighbors. We are about sustainability and in our farming operation and really in our region here. And this project is, I mentioned a 500 CFS canal. This is essentially the backbone for additional acres coming into recharge. We did phase 1 on our farm. Phase 2 and phase 3 add additional capacity leaving our area and spreading water to over 20,000 acres of farmland for groundwater recharge and floodwater protection. So we started this year, really the fall of 2022. We had the past 10 years, we had 7 years of drought, and we had 3 years of flooding. But the past 3 years had been some pretty severe droughts. There was really no prediction for 2023 being a very wet year. As it turned out, from what I've seen, there were approximately 29 atmospheric rivers, different size. But it brought the snowpack to record levels. And be honest with you, we weren't quite prepared to see this being a flood year. We were working on different components to take water out of our canal and bring them on farm that hadn't been completed. The photo, this is the Sierra in the Kings watershed where the water from the Kings River originates. And I think that was back in March. So what we found was we saw the snowpack increasing, and it began to really become evident that we were going to have a flood year. So we began looking for portable equipment to take water out of the canal, move it into our basins. We have about 350 acres of dedicated basins that we farm during dry years, and we flood during wet years like we had this year. I knew that pump availability was going to be difficult because everyone would be clamoring for the same equipment. So we actually brought and rented pumps over a month before floodwater actually appeared in the river and was available. Some of the issues and challenges we faced with that was pump reliability. We would have, we had quite a few pumps out here. We would have pumps go offline for a day or two before they could be repaired. We had diesel costs. We had, the rental costs, the monthly rental costs. We were getting pumps like the one you see here, and we're not able to get meters on all of them, which presented a problem for us. We had to do some estimation of water flow and how quickly we were going to be able to fill our ponds. We had the challenges with water management. As you know, water rights are always an issue. Floodwater, they're being looked at the State Water Board. But we knew that the State Water Board permits were slow and difficult to obtain and expensive. So we were extremely happy when the executive order from the governor was signed, which allowed growers and agencies to take floodwater with certain conditions attached. There had to be the threat of downstream flooding to communities, and there were several environmental components to this as well about putting this water, doing recharge on dairies, and no harm to any species, endangered species, and fish protection. So we switched our operation from a strictly farming operation into high gear on managing water. Felt like we were an irrigation district at times. Our guys were extremely good at adapting, but believe me, it was challenging to essentially keep the farm running at the same pace we were and running quite a bit of water into many of our basins and into our fields for in-lieu recharge. I think my guys actually told me they were having nightmares about water and some of the issues we were facing. And I believe them because I had a couple myself. We had issues. As I said, this was the first time we were running our operation. We found that we were not able to take all of the water that this pump produces. It produces about 70,000 gallons a minute, 150 CFS, which 300 acre feet a day. We knew our infiltration rates from studies we had done earlier. We found that once we began, we had some issues of probably not getting the infiltration rates we had expected. And we had water measurement issues. We're still discussing the exact number of acre feet that we did put on. But really, we found we had quite a bit of sediment in the floodwater that we really hadn't anticipated. And I believe that did affect our infiltration rates. We probably should have let that water go by. But like I say, this was the first year of running this project. And it was a real learning process, to say the least. This is what the water looked like when we did get going. There was just a tremendous sediment load that came with this water early on. It cleared up as we progressed through the season, but early on it was looked like chocolate milk coming out of there. These are just some of the pumps, the portable pumps that we put in place. We had about 300 acres of pistachios here that we flooded pretty much at one time. We would give them a break and let them dry down. We didn't want to kill them. They were just coming out of dormancy. It was early March when we began the project. So some of the issues that we faced. Number one, like I say, our infiltration rates were less than what we had hoped for. We had, as any area will have, this project was built and then it sat for about 2.5 years without water. We had gophers that drilled holes through our levees that eventually created levee breaks. The field on the left is about an 80 acre field and holds about 200 acre feet of water. And the canal holds about 95 acre feet of water. So when we ended up having 2 levee breaks early on, and we had that water go back into the canal, and we had levee breaks from the water in the canal spilling out. We ended up cutting part of the canal. We allowed water to flow into our pistachios, and I've got a photo of that in just a little bit here. But we also saw wind erosion. This area is a very sandy soil, which is great for recharge, but for holding integrity of the levees turned into a real problem. We'd get, I live on the farm, and I've got a wind chime outside my bedroom, and every time I heard that in the middle of the night, I had some pretty bad feelings about what was going on in our fields. But the levee breaks, they never occur during the daytime. They'd always occur at about 2 or 3 in the morning. And my guys were extremely diligent. We had guys out there at night watching these fields, watching the levees, and would get a hold of the rest of our crew. They would be out there 3, 4 in the morning, making repairs, cutting levees where they needed to move water. So we had a lot of we had wind out of the north, and then we'd get a storm in, and we'd get wind out of the south. We ended up getting plastic lining the most vulnerable areas to maintain the levees as best we could. But you can see here in this photo, we actually had waves hitting the edge, actually really going over the levee all the way into the canal. So it was a very challenging spring. One of the other things, we initially had our water level within our basins too high. We found out later we can keep them at a lower level, and we can kind of mitigate some of the problems that we ran into with the higher levels. I think we ran into more gopher holes and issues with the higher levels, and we had more erosion all the way up near the top of our levees. So we made some changes as we moved through this. But like I say, it was challenging. Every day we had a new issue. Well, my slide doesn't want to advance.
It wouldn't be a LunchMAR without a brief technical challenge.
Yeah, I apologize. Let me see if I can figure this out.
Possibly maybe stop share and then reshare on the new slide. We'll give that a whirl.
Let's try that.
And we're still seeing it.
Can you use those arrow buttons near the bottom?
Yeah, that's what I'm trying.
Yeah.
Oh, there we go.
Oh, there you go.
Very
Success.
good. So this was just some of the repair work we did. My guys were really good about repairs. We were down for about 16 days from, we had 2 levee breaks within a period of 2 days. You know, we had the news crew out. They were, because the water was heading toward a state highway. We explained there was really no threat to the highway. They got their drones up anyway. But what we did, I hired the guy that actually built the canals. He works for us now, and he was instrumental in getting the equipment we needed and putting these levees back together with really a relatively short period. So we have made our levees stronger and more resilient. Some of the other issues we faced, we really didn't anticipate. These are pistachios that we intentionally flooded. We used, when we did have a levee break, we cut our canal, we moved the water into 300 acres of pistachios. This was the deep end of the pool. But if you look at the drip tape, you'll notice it's floating across to the next row. We had water in these fields, we had wind come up, and the drip tape actually floats. And it had a tendency to pull it apart where the connections were, and spread it actually throughout the field. When we did finish with recharge, we did go back, put everything back together. Everything did work fine, but it definitely took some time. We had some tree loss, but it was minor. We had between 50 and 100 trees in this, almost near this area right here, that died, and I'll explain that in a photo that I have of it. We actually had a neighbor complain that lives out in this region about the noise from the pumps. You saw earlier, we put bales of hay next to the pumps to try and quiet them down the best we could. We actually had a sheriff show up, had to explain to him what we were doing and the benefit we were doing for the communities downstream. We had our mosquito abatement team out here. We spoke with them. They looked at all of our basins and said, look, you guys, you will not have a problem with mosquitoes in the ponds that you have here. They're deep enough. There's no a lot of vegetation around on the edges. So we found out a lot of little issues that did come up. We got through them and we're pretty successful. This is that same field. If you look at the region here where the water did not drain off the field, that's where we had the problem. These trees were leafing out at the time. They were pollinating during this period. And what we found, we actually had a wheat cover crop in there, and we had some anaerobic decomposition going on. That area became warmer, and it did kill trees within this one stretch. We weren't able to get all the water off. And you can see what happens. These trees come out and they tend to collapse. What we did, as soon as we saw this and as soon as it got dry enough, we ran a disc through here and aired out the ground, tried to dry it out the best we could. And really, to my surprise, there were trees not quite this bad, but they began to regrow, and we saved the majority of the ones that did have a problem. Like I say, we did lose some, but that was the risk we took. We were willing to take on this. These are 5-year-old trees. We actually harvested them about 2 weeks ago. So yeah, what went right? You know, according to our numbers, we were around 18,000 acre feet of water. We're working on that to fine tune that. It could be less, but to me, that number is not as important as really what we did. We provided flood relief for Mendota, Firebaugh, Tranquility. We learned what our strong points were and really what our weak points were. This is a graph of the pump and the acre feet pumped during that period. And you can see a gap right here before, toward the end of March, early April. That's where we had our levee breaks. But you'll also notice the peaks and the valleys as we move over to the right side. And really what that shows is that we were not able to run the pump continuously 24/7. We tried early on when we were filling the ponds, but once we ended up getting pretty much most of the area full and saturated, we had to run in cycles, which meant that we had markers in we pumped from a lower canal, which is river level, to a upper level with the main canals for distribution. We had markers there, so we watched, and when the water level dropped to a lower level, we turned it back on. We ran from 4 to 8 hours and then turned off, which really wasn't the way this was designed. We looked at putting a VFD on it, and we found that we were unable to put a variable speed drive on this motor. The motor is a 450 horsepower motor and fairly complicated. So we're looking at different ways we can continuously run this motor in the future. So we did create habitat. Pretty amazing. You put water and you get wildlife. We had geese, Canadian geese that showed up. We had black-necked stilts. We had avocets, and we had other shorebirds that showed up and actually reproduced in these temporary ponds that we had here, which really surprised me and kind of lets you know what is possible. I mean, this wasn't a shallow pond, but we did find a tremendous amount of wildlife that showed up and made it their home for the period that we had water here. So, pardon me. So our groundwater levels, So the chart on the left is a 2-year slide of what the groundwater levels have done in our region. And if you look back on the left side of the left graph, this was 2022. And typically we see our highest water levels in groundwater in April. And then we see a decline due to pumping during the summer. And then we see a slow resurgence back to a similar level. But really, if you look at the graph on the right, this is 2023. And it starts out in January with recovering levels, and we get to the April 1st area, and we hit peak. We had already begun in around March 10th with recharging. We have about 200, a little over 200 acres in this region. This monitor is just on the south side of one of the fields. And you can see the declining water levels until we get to May. And then we saw pretty much a static level where we would normally see a drop of anywhere from 20 to 25 feet of our water table. We didn't see that until we got to August. The water was turned off, I think around the 17th of July. And what happened was we turned our pumps on to irrigate our crops. So you see in the last half of August, you see a decline in groundwater levels. But then, as you see in September, what's happened all the way through October, we've seen a real climb in groundwater levels to levels that were higher than they were in 2022 at their highest point, and higher than they were in April of and during the summer of 2023. So we're seeing the continuous flow of the water that we put on during the summer reaching the groundwater table and actually pulling it up. So we're going to monitor this. We've had these monitors in for several years. So we're going to continue to monitor this throughout the fall, winter, and next spring to see where we go from here. So as I said, this is our first year. We knew it was going to be challenging, but we were able to show proof of concept on a large scale. We had acres with either direct recharge or in lieu recharge of over 2,500 acres that were involved in this. We had 25 to 30 pumps, diesel pumps. We had tractor mounted pumps. We did anything we can get our hands on to move water. We were really pleased to see DWR pick up a little less than a month and a half worth of cost for these pump rentals and the diesel. That was a real game changer. We'd love to see more of that in the future. And really, our project is ready for expansion to another 12 miles to the east toward the Raisin City region. There are grants that have been awarded, and construction is scheduled to start sometime next year. We designed our project really for definitely more water than we need for our operation. We're running one pump, and we're having, as you can see, a difficult time keeping up with the water that we're pumping with that one. The project's designed for an additional 3 450 horsepower lift pumps that will pump approximately 500 CFS per day. So I always say we built the 4-lane freeway. We need 1 lane of it. And as it expanded, we'll be repaid for the work that we have done on the project to get it to this stage. We know that floodwater comes many times in short bursts. You need to capture it. You need to have the capacity to get it and move it as quickly as you can. This is a shot of our pistachios. It's just one of the other pumps. We kept these pistachios flooded for about a month, and then we started backing off, letting them dry down. and then reflooding them. But we actually put a considerable amount of water on these throughout the year. We harvested them about a week ago. Yields were normal and no damage to the trees. And I think part of that's due to the fact we have sandy soil. We can move water down fairly quickly. But you know, one of the other things that I didn't expect, but we found that we had much better infiltration rates in these pistachio orchards, much better than just the sandy ground, the open fields. So I think that's got to be due to the root structure and the channels that are made available to the water. So improvements, what are we looking to do in the future? These vaults were put in for pumps last fall. We didn't think we would need to have pumps in this spring. So we currently have 4 of these pumps, 8,500 gallon per minute pumps on order at a cost of around $575,000. But we want to move away from the diesel. It's cumbersome. It's fine for short term, but we found that, you know, we put 1,000 gallon tanks for diesel. Diesel's expensive. We have engines that you know, we'd just rather go with electric. It's cleaner. So these will be fitted with 75 horsepower motors and pumps for the future to fill our basins. We're looking at possibly a bypass system so that our main pump can run consistently, and so that we don't cause a rise and fall of the river flow. We know that it's critical to be able to rely on constant flow to prepare for downstream flooding. So that's one of the key things we're putting together. We're going to be doing some rebuilding of our levees and canals where it's needed, where we had erosion, but we need to go back and patch up a few places, make them a little more sturdy. And we're also looking at, we're looking at the possibility of farming the fields that we flood, putting them in organic production so that there will be no issue with any farm chemicals that get applied for crop protection. And, you know, at some point we may turn them into some type of native habitat, because I know that we can get better infiltration rates. And, you know, it's difficult to farm if you don't know if you're going to have water coming in the spring. You know, you really can't plant some of the winter crops. So we're looking at that as also as a possibility. And we're looking at the possibility of adding additional fields to our project so that we have better capacity to take more water when it is available. And we think we can do that with some small levees around some of the fields that we have that are ideal for a recharge. So a couple other things we've done that were a little different. The field on the left was one of our flooded basins. We were thinking, okay, we'd like to continue to use the water that's in the basin for in lieu recharge. You know, don't pump, leave it. So I had my guys put together a very simple siphon that was portable. We moved it from field to field. And what we did, we moved the water from the field back into the canal and then extracted it at a point of diversion that we could use it for irrigation of our crops. It was a simple little project, but it was amazingly efficient. We used rice boxes on the right to kind of keep our ponds in check. If they got too high, they would overflow. They'd move into the pistachio field that you see above there. So we did some different things to try and stabilize our ponds and move water where we could. Cost to recharge, we had pump rental, diesel, electricity, maintenance, labor, and record keeping, and a lot of manpower. But at each of our pumps, we put up stations with a little mailbox, and every time that pump was had diesel put in, every time that pump was on, we kept records of it. As I said, there were a few of our pumps that didn't have meters, but this is the record keeping that we did. And we have a mountain of data that we're just beginning to look at. So these are just preliminary estimates. They're not hard and fast numbers. Some of them are, but we know we probably omitted a few things. But our recharge costs were around $1.1 million. And that was for everything we did that was related to the groundwater recharge this year. But when you take a step back, we looked at our 2022 power bill versus the 2023 power bill for the period up till the end of August. Typically, in 2022, we spent 2.4 million up to that point. In 2023, we spent 1.6. So we had an $800,000 year over year savings. So you get down to a net recharge cost at that point of $300,000. DWR picked up, like say, a little over a month of expenses for our recharge project, $269,000. You add that back in, you're at $569,000. And then the fields that we didn't farm because we had them flooded, we just put $1,000 per acre net income. So there's another $340,000 of lost income. So we ended up with a net figure of a little over 900,000. And if you divide that into the acre feet, we're around $48 per acre foot of water being placed either in recharge, direct recharge, or in lieu recharge. And that was, we had 139, our acre foot was based on our average acre feet was 139 acre feet per day, including 16 days that we were off. The net running days, we did 158 acre feet per day. Like I say, these are all estimates. We have a lot of data we have to go through. And our capacity at that pump is 300 acre feet. So you can see we ran a little over 50%, but we really want to do better than that. So how does California prepare up and scale up? I think number one is certainty of water. We know that there's now legislation that will essentially continue the executive order till 2029. That's important. But I think, to make investments of this scale that are really going to make a difference in California for floodwater capture, we really need more certainty in the flood flows. Anything we can do to improve that is definitely going to help bring more water on the ground and rebuild our aquifers. We need additional grants for infrastructure, for flood control and recharge benefits. We have to worry about our environmental protection. We don't want to create a problem somewhere else by taking water. But typically the water comes in big slugs and tends to cause more problems than good. There's a possibility of working with repurposed lands in the future and maybe turning some of those into recharge areas. We've heard the numbers on Sigma and land retirement, so there could be good options in the future. You definitely need to involve rural communities and their water supply, the people that live in this region and the regions where we do groundwater recharge. We know that we need to have fresh, clean water and plenty of it. And by doing recharge in the right places, I think you can actually mitigate some of the issues with water quality in many areas. But this really is I look at this as a major investment to capture floodwaters, transport, and store them underground. So I am going to turn this over to one of our partners, Scott Bradford, He is the research leader for USDA ARS SAWS unit in Davis and a collaborator on the ongoing dry well and AgMAR activities. And we'll be discussing some of the work that he has been doing here on Terranova Ranch. And I'm not sure, but Scott, you may be including some of Helen's work as well, with the movement of nitrates and pesticide issues. So I will turn it over to you, Scott, and thank you.
Thanks, Don. Adam and I just touched base, and we think it might be best to reschedule that discussion just for time limitations and so that people can ask you questions. Are you okay with that, Don?
I'm fine with that. Yeah, I didn't realize, pardon me, how long we've gone.
No, it is a great presentation, though. Thanks, Don.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
thank you, Don. That was great. Yeah, I think
I also really wanted to thank Phil Bashan for all the work that he's done with our project, and for Dave Merritt with KRCD for all the work in getting our project put together and to the finish line.
great, thank you. Yeah, so we'll schedule a separate webinar with Scott and Helen to go over some of the data that he's got ready. I'm excited to see what he's got and some of the data from your experiment this year. Great job, Don. Amazing work. Talk about dedication and having your staff have nightmares about water and everything. You put them through a lot there, but thank you for all your hard work. One of the comments I wanted to make before we open it up to questions was, there was a lot of sediment in the water, not only in the canal, but after you put it onto your fields. And that's something we here at Orange County Water District are battling all the time. The material that tends to clog the easiest is the stuff that floats first, all the fine silts and clays. And so it's always a challenge to how do you take massive volumes of water, get it onto the ground without stirring it up and shooting yourself in the foot right from the get-go. So it's always a fine balance and a dance, if you will, and trying to make it work.
No question. I think in the future, we're going to try and, if we can, let some of that water go by and let it clear out a little better before we begin the project. And yeah, it's ironic because you go to our flooded fields and the water would be crystal clear. So we knew it was falling out, and it was essentially plugging the pores that we really needed for recharge.
Yes, right. If anybody online wants to put a question in the chat, please do so right now. I do want to ask Don a question, though, in terms of, you mentioned about scaling up. What are some of your thoughts about what California can do better in terms of capturing the stormwater?
Well, Adam, I really believe that California, in the past, I was actually around when some of these dams were dedicated, but in fact, I watched Whiskeytown reservoir get dedicated by President Kennedy. So that'll tell you how long I've been around. And but really, during the 50s and 60s, there was a real push to put water storage for floodwater, really for floodwater protection and for what use by agriculture up. And I would love to see the same type of enthusiasm for doing groundwater recharge, find dedicated areas that are perfect for recharge throughout the state, and build the infrastructure to get the water there and get it underground. So, I mean, we know with climate change, we're going to be seeing more extreme weather. We're going to have longer droughts. We're going to have wet periods. Who knows what this year is going to bring, but I just think we need the same enthusiasm and the financial funding from state and federal agencies to put something like this together, put together a plan for the whole state.
A great idea, Don. So we do have a question online. So about the pistachio trees, the question is, how long were they flooded, and why did you see some tree die off, and what do you attribute that to?
So We kept those trees underwater for about a month before we dried them back out, and we re-flooded them later, but they stayed wet for about a month. And one thing, it was cool during that period, and we know that cool water holds more oxygen. We know that they can tolerate it. We've done this. We did this back in 2017, showing that we could flood pistachio trees. Why did they die? We got anaerobic conditions going on. We couldn't get the last little bit of water off the field. It got warm. It was waterlogged essentially, and it killed the roots. I mean, that's what happened. So we did our best to dry them out and bring them back.
Great. Another question for you in terms of your neighbors and water. How do some of those discussions go with some of your neighbors?
So our neighbors were extremely enthusiastic about this. They've been following our project for quite some time, and they know that phase 2 will include their farms. They're excited. They were glad to see the water in these basins and on our fields. So I think it gives them a little hope that maybe we won't have to idle as much ground as we previously thought could happen within our region. Our region is reliant on groundwater pumping exclusively. This is some of the first water that has really come in and made a difference in the region. And let's face it, we put water in the ground on our farm. That water doesn't stay there. It spreads out and it benefits all of our neighbors. So they were happy to see it. I asked if they wanted to help support it financially, and didn't get the right answer there.
Right. Yeah, a final question about you. You're part of a GSA in our area. So how did the Sigma and all the sustainability criteria fit in with what you're trying to do? Is there are you getting a benefit from that GSA for all your work that you're doing?
We are not, until there is an allocation process in place where there would be a credit system. No, there is no benefit. There's an overall benefit to the GSA because we are bringing water within the boundaries of the GSA, which is a very good thing. But individual credit, no, we're not at this time. We are not getting a credit for it. But what we are doing is we are rebuilding the aquifer. We've done such a good job of over pumping and overdrafting over the years. We have a lot of space that we need to fill. Our region, back in the early 1900s, I've got photos. I didn't take them, but there are photos of artesian wells in this region,
Wow.
which
Right.
means you had water almost to the surface at that time.
Right.
And now we're 240 feet deep. So
Right.
we have a long way to go.
Yeah, well, I hope GSA devise good incentive programs that will incentivize people that aren't as altruistic as you, that need that kick to do something like what you're doing. So that'll be a game changer, I think.
And we think down the road we'll come to that, to where we'll have sustainable yields for the region, and probably a water trading system in place, and credits and debits. So long term, it's probably going to provide a benefit, but currently we know our water supply is dwindling. We want to make sure that we can continue to farm.
Well, thank you, Don. We're out of time. Great presentation. I look forward to a future field trip to your area when it's appropriate. So look forward to that. And want to thank you and Scott and Helen for being willing to participate. And I'll turn it back over to Megan.
Thanks, Don. Thanks, Adam. Not much more to say, but we look forward to seeing Don again at the FloodMAR Forum event. And we also have a couple of other growers joining us to tell their on-the-ground experiences from that landmark 2022-2023 wet years. I was hoping to get more information on the gophers. Actually, I had this whole vision of Caddyshack, like how much erosion did they actually cause. So that's for later. It's for next time. But wanted to extend our thanks to Don, and thank you all for joining us this afternoon. Have a great rest of the day, and we'll be in touch. Scott, I'm going to ping you for a future LunchMAR session as well.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you again.